Hello everyone, welcome to a movie review. So first time I've done this in a long while. The last thing I think I reviewed was How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, I think, all the way back in like early 2019. It was either that or the Lego Movie Part 2. Those two movies came out very close to one another and I can't remember which came first. Um but yeah, I'm back with movie reviews. This is a big summer for movies, and with all the other projects and stuff I've got going on, it means less time for the regular weekly videos. I did a lot of Star Wars reviews earlier in the year, and so it's like with all the movies coming out this summer, I thought that this would be a good time to finally get back into doing movie reviews. So we're gonna start today with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This has been a big anticipated movie for me. I love the first two Guardians movies. I really like the Guardians in Infinity War and Endgame for the little bit that they're in both of those movies. And I think overall, I think I like the Guardians more than the Avengers, despite the Avengers having more screen time because they've got four movies, five if you count Civil War, because that's kind of Avengers 2.5 and everything. But there's something about the characterization of the Guardians that I just really love. So I was very excited for the third one. Obviously, I've never reviewed a Marvel movie or on this channel before. I've reviewed a Marvel show. I reviewed the final season of Agents of Shield back when that was out a couple years ago. It was like 2020, I think. And so I enjoy the MCU. I really like the MCU. But lately I have been kind of more meh on it, which seems to be the sentiment of a lot of people. I'm not as down on it as a lot of other people are currently. I think that it's actually kind of remained consistent. I don't think the drop in quality has been that drastic. I think it's actually been pretty comparative to what we've had in the past. It's just that Phase 4 had so many shows and movies in it, and it came out all so quickly that it was more obvious because there was more content in all of Phase 4 than like the first two phases combined. If you're not including like Agents of Shield in that run, and you're just looking at the movies. So that's kind of funny to think about. That's just how much stuff is in Phase 4. But even then, some of the stuff we got in Phase 4 there were some stinkers in there. A lot of people did not like Eternals. I still actually haven't seen Eternals. That's one of the two current Marvel movies that I haven't seen. Actually, I haven't seen that or Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So it's, a lot of people didn't like Eternals. And then a lot of people didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder either. I didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder. Although I didn't feel as viscerally betrayed by it like a lot of people did, because I didn't particularly care for Ragnarok either. I think Ragnarok is fine. But it wasn't exactly what I was looking for in a Thor movie, because I actually liked the first two, how they were. Were they the best movies? No, but it's like, I thought the idea of space Viking was kind of cool. And so then for the third movie to kind of ditch whatever plot lines that they were going for and just to go off on this kind of what felt like a tangent at the time in this totally random direction, I didn't really like. It was funny, it was enjoyable, but it's like, this was not as deep as I was hoping that a third Thor movie could potentially get. But everyone likes jokey Thor, I guess, until they don't. So it is kind of funny in retrospect to see like anything and everything that Ragnarok did that was actually good, then kind of have walked back, because I thought because like I said, I enjoy Ragnarok fine. There's stuff in it that I think is done really well. It's like I like Thor losing his eye, and it's like, and him finally becoming the king of Asgard and finally stepping into those shoes and accepting, and finally having matured enough to become king of Asgard. And then Infinity War just goes, no, never mind. And then the end of Endgame goes, no, never mind. And, he gets his eye back and becomes Fat Thor. And then Thor: Love and Thunder is just more of no, never mind. It's like, gosh, it's like, that's what Thor's like one of the, I'm going to be careful with how I say this, because I like Thor. His personality is fun depending on which version of the character we're getting. Because, like, there's early Thor, there's like, Dark World, Age of Ultron Thor, who's a little bit more bland, and then there's Goofy Thor from the more current movies. I've always enjoyed Thor, despite his personality going all over the place. But he's kind of one of the worst written characters in the MCU because of how he keeps bouncing around. And thank goodness for Chris Hemsworth kind of keeping him somewhat grounded to where we still enjoy watching him, even though when you chart his trajectory, not a lot of it feels natural, and it kind of feels like they're just throwing him around and doing whatever with that character, which is unfortunate because I think space Viking, god that shoots lightning out of his fingers is actually, with a giant hammer, is actually a really cool idea. It's like, can we just, why do we keep straying from this? Just have him do Shakespeare in the Park. I liked him doing Shakespeare in the Park, and with the vows and stuff. It was for when that movie came out in 2011, that was interesting. That was different, and I kind of, I don't like, I don't really like that they kind of moved away from that and they turned him into jokey Thor. And so it's like so it kind of feels like I'm getting to Guardians 3, by the way. That's part of the wrap up point here. But so I feel like that was kind of stuff like that is part of the reason I've kind of been less and less invested in the MCU as time has gone on. Not that it's all been terrible, but there's just been, it's like, that was fine. That was whatever. Like I said, still haven't seen Eternals. And I don't really even plan on seeing it unless, Secret Wars or something comes out and I go, oh yeah, you have to see Eternals and understand what's going on in Secret Wars. Then I'll go, okay, well at this point it's probably been like 3 years. I can watch it on Disney Plus. And then I talked about She-Hulk a little bit in one of my in one of my Mando reviews, I think, because I was comparing Disney Plus streaming options or whatever. Or maybe it was Bad Batch or something. It's like I said, there's been a lot of Star Wars recently that I've been reviewing. So She-Hulk, I liked until I didn't. Where it's I liked every episode up until the last one, and then I think the last episode killed the entire show for me because they tried to have. I think with that finale, they tried to have their cake and eat it too. Where it's they thought they were being smart by doing the fourth wall break and rewriting the ending, but then they didn't follow through, and then they just skipped all the interesting stuff and just went to the wrap up. It's okay, so that kind of killed the whole thing for me. But there's still Marvel stuff I'm looking forward to. Daredevil Born Again, obviously that's a big one because I really like the Netflix show. Whatever the heck they do with Spider-Man. See, I wasn't even that big a fan of No Way Home because I felt No Way Home was more nostalgia pandering than actually being about, the continuation of this Peter Parker in the MCU and his story. It felt more like Sony demanded that Marvel do this in order to keep Tom Holland and Spider-Man in the MCU. So they had to take this weird detour because I don't know. Watching the first two Homecoming movies, Homecoming and No Way Home, or Far From Home, excuse me, blah. Watching Homecoming and Far From Home, and then it's suddenly it's wait, this was all building to the introduction of the multiverse, and we have Green Goblin's back, and it's okay. It's I think the story makes no sense based on the previous two movies, and it's this is not where it felt like this trilogy was going at all, and building to this, it's no way. But even then, it's still an enjoyable watch because Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin is amazing. I think he's better in No Way Home than he is in the original Raimi movies, and I'm not even that big a fan of the Raimi movies. So it's so the MCU's been a mixed bag recently. And Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I went and saw that in the theaters, and I was that was not a good Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. Now that's a good Kang the Conqueror movie, but that's not a good Ant-Man movie. And so that was disappointing, but not disappointing at the same time, depending on how you view that movie. Because if you're thinking this as the third Ant-Man movie, it's lacking so many of the things that makes the previous two movies good, in my opinion. And it's the whole daughter relationship really feels forced in this one compared to, so it's it feels like you threw this in because you had to qualify it as an Ant-Man movie. It's none of the if they really wanted to if they really wanted to go all out and make that a really good movie, it's sure, have Ant-Man and the Wasp in it, but only have Ant-Man and the Wasp go down to the quantum realm and just have it be those two. It's it's definitely a movie where it felt like it was being pulled in two different directions. They wanted to introduce Kang the Conqueror and use the quantum realm to do it, because that actually kind of made sense the way they presented it. I was fine with that. But then they also wanted it to be the third Ant-Man movie. So like the third Ant-Man movie kind of got shanghaied into being the Kang the Conqueror introduction. And it's like, you're going to introduce Kang the Conqueror in Ant-Man? It's like, granted, technically he was introduced in Loki. I really like Loki, by the way. That's probably maybe my favorite of the Marvel shows that came out on Disney Plus. WandaVision's pretty good. I like Loki a lot. Falcon and the Winter Soldier's good. Miss Marvel was okay. I feel like that those 2 episodes where they went back in time or whatever, it's like, this does not feel like a season 1 storyline. This feels like a season 2 storyline. You're kind of rushing this a little bit. But so I'm excited for Loki season 2. That's something I'm looking forward to. But Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania really felt like that movie was getting pulled in 2 different directions, and it's a lesser film for it. But if you look at it as a Kang the Conqueror introduction, yeah, it's pretty good. So lo and behold, we finally get to Guardians 3, 11 minutes into this review of Guardians 3. And I am so happy to say that, yeah, this movie was really worth the wait and held up, I think, based on expectations. Now, is everyone going to think that? I don't know, because this is a much darker movie compared to the first 2. I mean, the first 2 have their dark moments and get serious. I mean, the fact that, like, I weep uncontrollably at the end of the second one, it has its good emotional hooks in you. It's just so good. And this one just really kind of continues that, but it lacks a lot of the goofy, zany comedy that we have that we had in the first 2. There's moments of it for sure. Also, by the way, full spoilers, obviously. Just, I guess I should say that now before I really get too much farther in, but yeah, I'm just going to spoil the heck out of this entire movie. But so yeah, so like the couch scene, for instance, like I said, spoilers. The couch scene, for instance, I was losing it in the theater. It's like, dude, sit up. It's like, get your muddy boots off her couch. It's like, it's a couch. It could be built for 2 different purposes. It's like laying down is one of those. It's like Drax is so insistent. Meanwhile, Mantis and Nebula are having that little side conversation. No, your death sounds the same thing as your dum dum noise. It's like it's like, that's the exact same. No, it is not. It's like my death is and then it's like this. So I just that's that zany kind of very family dynamic sibling comedy that I just really appreciate about the first 2 movies, and that was right up the alley of that. And then like they're having this argument, and then at one point Nebula just takes a little drink of the tea or whatever, that just goes, "This is really good. I like this tea." Just a little non sequitur to herself and no one else, because the Bat Lady can't understand what they're saying. So I just love that entire scene. And then Drax finally sits up and he starts to sit down. Quill goes, "Drax, I see you moving." It's like, he sits back up, trying to keep the dysfunctional family together. So there was a little bit of that back in there. But overall, it's a very serious movie, and I appreciate it for being serious. I mean, like, I did miss a lot of those like multiple laugh out loud moments from the first 2 movies, but considering this is the end of the trilogy and potentially the last time we'll see a majority of these characters for like probably a long time, if ever, I think this was a worthy send off, and it justified it being more serious. Almost to the point of being melancholy at times, but I don't think it strayed too far into there, because the thing that I love about this movie especially is that it has a happy ending. It's bittersweet, yes, but it's still a happy ending. No one dies, and I love that, because, and it's so, I've watched a couple of interviews with James Gunn and Chris Pratt talking about the movie, doing the press tour. And James Gunn talking about, it's like, just because it's an ending doesn't mean that you have to kill a whole bunch of characters and, death being the final thing. It's like, you can have everyone survive and, still have a satisfying ending for everyone. And I really appreciate that. It's especially that, we've got several characters going their separate ways. And, the family unit as a whole is quote unquote breaking up. It's not like they're all mad at each other now. It's like they just need to go chart their own paths for a while. But eventually they're gonna. It's like, whether we see it or not, eventually they will, come back together and and there's still gonna be that family. And so that's just, that I just really like that, and then a lot of the small character moments in that final scene. I'll designate an entire portion of this review just to the final scene because I love it. Again, more uncontrollable weeping in the theater. At least it's like, well, I guess I was able to control it, but it's like, ooh, it was hard. Um, so yeah. So I thought it being more serious was definitely a worthy change from the first two movies. Like, because not to say the first two weren't serious at times, but overall, you remember the first two movies for being more zany, more colorful, more off the wall bonkers and stuff. But this one was a little, well, it was a lot more grounded. It was a lot more serious. It wasn't as colorful. I feel like the color palette was a little bit more subdued here. And I don't know what to think about that, because even in the scenes where there is color, it still feels very muted, like like when they're infiltrating the gooey headquarters. I don't remember what it's actually called. It's just that mass of flesh floating in space, which is really off-putting and gross. But still very James Gunn, very Guardians of the Galaxy. They have these bright, colorful Among Us spacesuits, because I know everyone's made that joke online. And they leave the Bowie to In the Meantime, which I've fallen in love with that song, by the way. I've been listening to it on repeat on Awesome Mix Volume 3. Forget the whole, it's like there's a lot of good songs on that album. But but I've just been listening to In the Meantime on repeat. There's just something about it I just love. And but even then, it's like it's these colorful spacesuits, but they don't pop as much as other things from the previous two movies. Guardians 2 especially was like almost oversaturated when it came to its color palette. Like, it was so bright and colorful, and I loved that. It's like, when they first get to Ego and My Sweet Lord is playing, and they're floating on the little platform, and they're kind of taking in the view and everything, and like Drax, pokes the bubble and it turns into all the other bubbles and stuff. There's something so colorful and magical about all that Guardians 3 being much more subdued in its color palette, it's like, was a little disappointing, but it fit the movie, because I don't think you can have the High Evolutionary doing his thing to a very bright, colorful movie. It needed to be laid back a little bit, but it does make this film more distinctive compared to the first two, where the first one was, more, it didn't really have a distinctive color palette, I don't think. It was in line with the other Marvel movies, especially at the time. But then Guardians 2 was so colorful and bright. It's so funny that it and Ragnarok came out in the same year, because Ragnarok is also very bright and colorful, but in a very different way. But it's like Guardians 2, I feel like there's moments where it's like the entire screen is almost glowing. I just think that's really cool. But then in contrast to that, then Guardians 3, it's like you almost want to turn the brightness on your screen up. Or in the movie theater. Not that it was too dark or any in terms of its lighting, but it's just like, oh, it's like, this could be a little bit brighter. But I understand them doing that. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. It's like, that's a very technical aspect of, it's like, I don't feel like, you often hear about that. It's like when people were, usually it's just people sticking to the plot. It's like, I'm actually talking about the color palette in this movie. It's like, but like I said, it was fitting. It was fitting because of the very serious story. Also, it's also weird, because one thing I do and don't like about this movie is the fact that they kind of sidelined, but also didn't sideline Rocket throughout the entire movie. Because the movie's about Rocket, but he's not in it much. He's kind of lying. He's not really an active participant in most of the movie. He's kind of lying there unconscious throughout most of it, and then every now and then we cut to a flashback. And Rocket is probably in my top 3 Marvel characters. I mean, he already was, but he definitely is now. It's so tough too, because obviously Iron Man's on there. Agent Coulson, he's probably in like the top 5 or something, but then Rocket Raccoon, man. It's like, what a character, especially after this movie. So we get a lot of his backstory, but then again, like I said, of him being an active participant, we don't really get a whole lot of him in this. And I was a little disappointed by that, but also not at the same time, because again, the whole movie's about him. So it's really weird. I feel really weird about it, because like I said, he's not an active participant, but the whole movie's about him, but he has like the least amount of screen time out of all the Guardians because of that. So it's really kind of weird that way. Yeah, but and everyone gets a little bit to do. I'm glad that everyone gets a little bit of stuff to do. It's, even if it's a small little thing, they all kind of have a little arc, a little bit of story devoted to them. And even if it doesn't really come into play until like the end, because like Drax, I mean, it kind of feels like he's just along for the ride for most of the movie, and then at the very end, you see what his purpose in the movie is, and that's for him to really finally be able to be a father again after having lost his original family to Ronan's forces prior to the first Guardians, and seeing that joy and elation because Drax is such a good character too. Because a lot of people just look at him as this bumbling idiot, comic relief side character, and he does fill that role a lot. But it's like one of my favorite scenes in the entire MCU is in Volume 2, where Drax and Mantis are just sitting down having a little chat, and it's a very quiet, subdued moment, and Mantis just touches Drax on the shoulder to, oh gosh, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it because I think it's just such a powerful scene where Mantis touches Drax on the shoulder and she just starts weeping. And because that's how much sadness Drax has built up in him, but he has learned to live with it, and he is being healed by now being part of this family. And this is one of these things that I didn't even think about in terms of Volume 2 until I saw Volume 3 just a couple days ago, is part of the reason that Drax isn't as angry in Volume 2, and he isn't expressing that, and he is very jovial in Volume 2 compared to Volume 1, and he isn't like in a total constant state of crisis in Volume 2 compared to Volume 1, is because he's found his new family. And I love that he is the first one to vocalize that in Volume 2, where they're arguing about how they're going to stop Ego, and Nebula is like, "Why you guys are terrible? You guys aren't friends." And he goes, "No, we're family, and family sticks together. Now let's go save Quill." That's something I hadn't even really considered until Volume 3. For some strange reason, it's just not one of those things. It's just one of those things I hadn't really thought about. And of course, Drax being the one to vocalize this because he's the one that's, it's like they hadn't. I mean, in Volume 2, it only takes place a couple months after Volume 1. It's a very short span of time, so they hadn't known each other that long. But already he knew that they were like bonded, and that they were a found family at that point. And I'm such a sucker for the found family trope. I've said that before, I'm pretty sure. So for him, who had compared to the rest of them, more recently lost his actual blood family, because Gamora's had died years ago. Peter's mom died in front of him years ago. Rocket never really had much in an actual family, and it's like, as we learned in this movie, it's like his family had been killed in front of him years ago. Groot, he is Groot. We don't really know that much about Groot's backstory. And then of course Gamora, I touched on her. So his like emotional scars are much more recent and raw, and so for him to be the one to recognize that, hey, no, we are becoming a family and we need to save it. That's just, I think, a really cool thing about Drax. And so for him to finally in Volume 3 get to be that, you're not a destroyer, you're a father. It's like I wish, just for the alliteration part, I wish that Nebula had said, "You're not a destroyer, you're a dad." I would have really liked that. Instead of Drax the destroyer, Drax the dad royer, or just Drax the dad, or something like that. There's something about comic books and alliteration I just really like. I think that would have fit. But and him being so good with all the little kids, like doing basically what is a C-3PO impression. It's like, "Oh, look at me, I'm a monkey." It's like, that's a robot, not a monkey. It's like, it's obviously Drax's culture is very different compared to a lot of the other cultures, where even Gamora and Mantis and and Nebula are like, "This guy's weird," and they're all weird. They're all misfits, but Drax especially. So it's that's such a good moment where it's like, no, it's like you can take a step back from saving the galaxy and being like this harmer. It's like it's time for you to be protective and parental again. I just really love that because that's something he hadn't really been able to be, even though it's like, and that it explains so much about why he keeps like leaping into danger without thinking, because of him always trying to protect everyone else. So like when and it's like, yeah, he doesn't always think it through, but he's doing so out of such a sense of duty of protection, to where that's why he steals the motorcycle from the one poor guy that he just totally it just clotheslines right off of it. It's like, dang, dude. And tricks Mantis into getting on, just riding off. It's like he's going 5 miles an hour, Mantis. Just jump off if you're upset at him. But I love Mantis. She's so pure and innocent, and I love her. So I think Drax's conclusion is really satisfying. And then I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to save, like, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the very end of the movie. I'm not even going to touch on it yet. I love that they all have their suits, that they're comic accurate outfits and everything. That's so good. This is something I will say about Phase 4 onwards, is that we are finally, now that Marvel has permeated pop culture and everyone, quote unquote, likes comic books at this point, where it's like, even if they don't read the comics, or anything, or it's like, or they just have the one person in their family that knows, or does all the research and fills them in, it's like they at least like going to the Marvel movies, and so then they're kind of more accepting of comic book tropes and stuff at this point, that we're at a point in pop culture where we can just straight up have the costumes from the comics in there, with no like fancy alterations, or it's got to look realistic. It's like, and I think there's a place for like bringing silly comic book costumes into the movies, and updating them and modernizing them and making them look realistic. How would this look in the real world? I think there's definitely a place for that. But Doctor Strange having his very comics accurate outfit with all the different colorful blues on it and stuff, it's like, that's really cool. And then the Guardians walking down the ramp in the trailer, and it's like when they get to Counter Earth, and it's a slow mo shot, and they're all in the blue and red suits with the golden Ravager symbol on the chest, and everyone's like, oh, that's so cool, I love it. And it's like, and then like in Endgame, we got it's not as colorful, but still we got it looked very straight out of the comics Captain America suit, and everything. That's just really, really cool. So it's like, I'm glad that we're fine. And even then, that like the Homecoming, well, forget the Homecoming suit, the suit that we saw at the end of No Way Home for Spider-Man. It's like, I mean, that is straight out of the comics. I thought the Homecoming suit was like straight out of the comics. I mean, that was like the modernized, updated, straight out of the comics suit. But it's like the one from the end of No Way Home, that is straight out of the comics, and that is awesome. So that's really cool to see. So I'm glad that we're finally in a place where we just have the costumes from the comics in the movies at this point. I think that we've reached that point. I think that's just really cool. So, and I think it worked out well in this movie, because like the No Sleep Till Brooklyn hallway scene, oh my gosh, what a sequence. It's like, and it's like, you could tell it's all the Guardians, and it's like they're doing all the action, shooting and blasting and stabbing and all this other stuff, and with the exception of Groot, and Gamora, they're all wearing the blue, and it's like, it's so cool to see them fighting as a unit and everything. And like I said, man, what a sequence there with the hallway scene. I love how hallway scenes are now permeating, different mediums. Although I guess technically, if you want to really, I guess like one of the earliest hallway scenes was from Daredevil with the one take. So I guess Marvel was, I'm sure there's been other hallway scenes before, but but of course, whenever I think of hallway scenes, I think of Star Wars with like Vader or Maul or Luke, or it's like, just going ham down a hallway. But there was like some actually like really kind of gory kills, and it's a good thing that these kills were like, on these weird mechanoid synthetic creature things, because otherwise, like, this would be like a hard R. Because like at one point, Groot shoots out his vine hands and like stuffs it down the throat of one of those creatures, and then like it summons a bunch of branches, so they stab out from the inside. That's brutal. That is actually brutal. And then like Drax comes out and then it comes around and like slices it in half or whatever. And then Rocket's hopping around blasting people left and right, and then Peter's got got a little disc that I was expecting those to be mini explosives, but they ended up being electrified instead. And then of course I think the big one that really made me go oh in the theater is when Nebula's neck gets broken and her head is just dangling and it looks so gross, but because she's a cyborg, she just puts herself back together internally and she's fine. And it's like, oh my gosh, gross, but awesome at the same time. And then it's like they kill everything and then they're done. That was so cool. That was so awesome. It's like now I will say I'm not a big fan of that song, No Sleep Till Brooklyn. It's like, I guess I'm just not a big fan of Beastie Boys in general. So it's like I would have like I think it fit the scene, but it's like, I kind of would have preferred a different song to be used in that scene, something that's maybe a little more high tempo or something. But it's like, who am I to judge James Gunn on his music choices? So yeah, it's like I personally I would have chosen a different song to put in there, but it's not. That's like a nitpick. But it's like here's something that's not a nitpick that so as much as I'm going to just gush about this movie for however long I end up talking about it, I will say I think this is the worst out of the three Guardians movies. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a really really good movie, but I would put it in third place. Just because I have actual complaints about this movie as opposed to the first two, which I'm like, nah, I don't really have anything. And my biggest complaint about this movie is what was the point with Adam Warlock? It's like he really kind of served no purpose in the movie. You could have easily rewritten the scenes that he actually did something in to not include him and just done something slightly different, and it wouldn't have really set the movie off course like at all. And I think when you can do that, then you've got a character that doesn't really matter or need to be there. Because it's like, so you're probably saying it's like, well, but he's the one that set the movie in motion. It's like, well, but you could have also had it be Ravagers that were hired by the Supreme, I was about to say the Supreme Intelligence. That's the Kree. No, the High Evolutionary. It could have been Ravagers. And it's like, honestly, honestly, I think the Ravagers, for as almost pointless as I think their little cameos are, it's like you didn't really have to get them back for this, but I'm still glad you did. It's like even they, I feel like their cameos were more purposeful, and they were also just still kind of cameos. Where meanwhile, Adam Warlock was like, it's like you have no purpose being in this movie, kind of, except for the fact that you were set up at the end of Volume 2, but that's not James Gunn's fault, I don't think. So it's like, the beginning of the movie could have been Ravagers. The ending of the movie, because like the two things that Adam Warlock actually does to contribute to the plot, other than being a punching bag, is he's the one that injures Rocket, and that's the thing that kind of puts the movie in motion. And then the other thing he does is at the very end he saves Quill from dying out in space like Yondu. You could have very easily I almost think you could have very easily just omitted Quill almost dying in space completely, because he doesn't really learn anything from a near-death experience. It's not like he has a vision like Rocket and he sees his mom or something like that. I feel like he had already had the requisite character growth from coming to terms with Gamora and her handing him the picture of him, his mom, and his grandpa before she died, to him and everything. I feel like we had, and not the legwork had been done. There's nothing about the fake out death scene that really adds to that, so you didn't really even need it. So again, it's like you could have had them all escape at the very last minute, in keeping with the, callback to like the 80s and stuff. Peter could have like slid across at the very last second as the other ship's exploding and like a bulkhead door's coming down or something, and then he stands up and goes, "Whoo, that was like Indiana Jones." It's like, I think it would be done a little more tastefully than that, but you get the idea. It's like you could have easily. It's like you could. It's like it's these very 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 simple rewrites that I feel like if you can very easily rewrite something and it doesn't really change much of anything involving the main structure of the movie and the plot and everything, then then it's like, yeah, that Adam Warlock totally has no reason being in this movie and is kind of shoehorned in. I feel like, other than the fact that he was set up at the end of Volume 2, which I'm assuming James Gunn thought he was doing that to help them out with it with Infinity War and Endgame, and then they just didn't do that, which is kind of unfortunate. Um, and so then, but by the time we get to Guardians 3, James Gunn is probably thinking to himself, well, I kind of have to include Adam Warlock now because they didn't use him where I thought they were going to use him. And plans change and stuff. I don't know. At the time he was writing Guardians 2, they could have been planning to use him in Infinity War. And so Kevin Feige was like, hey, just throw in Adam Warlock at the very end for the setup. And he went, okay, after credit scene, easy. And then that didn't happen. so I don't know. So I feel like Adam Warlock was kind of a waste in this movie. But even then, I don't think he was written bad, which I know sounds weird considering I said he was a waste. But I don't think he was written bad because from a thematic level, I feel like he did kind of fit into the movie because he kind of went on a very quick crash course of how you become a guardian of the galaxy. It's that you meet these people, you try to kill them, then you realize they're not your enemies, they're your friends, and then you get on the team. That's like the checklist. Because like that's how the team was formed in the first place, is that, they all fought each other and tried to, like kill / kick each other to death, whatever, on Xandar. Then they get arrested, thrown in prison. Drax tries to kill Gamora because she's a pawn of Rodan, who's a pawn of Thanos, who he's angry at for killing his family. Then they all team up and escape together, and they still have this kind of uneasy alliance when they come together in the end. And that's how the Guardians are formed. Then movie 2, you have Yondu going after them because he wants the batteries but he still he still thinks of Quill as his son, so he doesn't actually want to hurt him. He's just trying to save face with the other Ravagers. But then he ends and the Nebula, same thing, where they capture her and everything, but then both Yondu and Nebula end up helping out in the end. Yondu dies and Nebula goes off to kill Thanos. That goes well for her, as we saw in Infinity War. Then by Volume 3, Nebula is like an actual guardian of the galaxy and everything, and she's kind of swapped places with Gamora, which is fascinating character development. So that's really funny. So Adam Warlock, he had that, kind of Cliff Notes version of we're speeding through this character arc where he meets the Guardians, he tries to kill them because that's what his mommy wants, Aisha, the High Priestess of the Sovereign. Then she dies. Then he realizes that the Guardians aren't his enemies, and then he ends up joining the team. So it's like, for this to be like the final outing, it was kind of fitting that we got that story arc again, because that's like the requirement for becoming a Guardian or whatever. Like I said, Kraglin technically fits that mold too because he was part of the Ravagers. So yeah. I mean, he didn't really. So I felt like he was a waste, but it's not like he didn't belong there. So it's like, I'm interested to what the heck are they going to do with Adam Warlock in the future? Because I could see them actually doing something with him, but then at the same time, like I could totally see an Adam Warlock movie happening. But then at the same time, I could also see them doing absolutely nothing with him, and it's going to be one of those things in 3 or 4 years where you see, the top 10 list of, it's like top 10 missed opportunities in the Marvel Cinematic Universe now that we're in Phase 7 or whatever. And it's like, Adam Warlock, 2017 to 2023 or something like that. Where it's like, at the time, when this movie, when Guardians 2 came out, we all thought this was a build up to Infinity War. Wrong. So it's like, so I'm curious what the heck they're going to do with Adam Warlock. I don't know. Maybe he's going to pop up in the Marvels or something. It's like, I could see that being like a surprise cameo where it's like he shows up for the latter half of the Marvels and he helps them out or something like that. And then we get more Guardians cameos that way sooner than we were expecting. I don't know. So yeah, Adam Warlock, kind of a big complaint I have with the movie overall because it just felt like he was forced in there. It's like it wasn't exactly a square peg into a round hole, but it was it was definitely it was a square peg into a square hole that was just a little too small, so it fit through, but just barely. So, um, So yeah, let's talk about Rocket. Because earlier I was saying that it's like, Rocket's probably one of my favorite characters in the MCU. So for this movie to kind of be about him, to see his origin and everything was really, really cool. It basically lines up with what, I think most of us probably always thought what, his origin was. He was this genetic experiment. He escaped. He's very intelligent, blah, blah, blah. Something along the way made him very mean. I think it is fascinating to now knowing his backstory, going back and watching a lot of his interactions with different characters in the first two movies. Um, Especially with because that's one of the things that makes Volume 2 my favorite of the three, and why I think it's the best of the three. Is it's like that revelation on first viewing of Yondu going, "I know who you are, boy. You're me," and that shot of them staring at each other and the instant connection between them, where it's like Yondu's been thinking this from like the moment the moment he saw Rocket, he was interacting with him. He kind of pegged Rocket for who he really was, and then now Rocket understands, and he's like, "What kind of a pair are we?" And it's like there's this instant understanding between them. I love that, and it's like it offers so much insight into Rocket up until that point in the story, because the whole first movie, and then there it's like we've seen little twinges of Rocket where it's like, oh yeah, now he's deep down he does care, but he spends so much of the movie just being a vicious little jerk, and making fun of everyone and just beating everyone up, whether it be verbally or physically. um and it's like the only person he's really genuinely kind of nice to in the first and second movie up until that point is really just Groot. And part of that's only because I think Groot is a baby for part of that time. Where because even then, even when they're partners and working as bounty hunters or whatever, he's still like, Why are you drinking fountain water? Don't say no. I saw you doing it. That's disgusting, you big idiot." And it's like, learn genders, man. It's like he's kind of constantly admonishing Groot for different reasons, because he's just frankly not that smart. He's a big tree guy, but he's still very sweet. And so that moment at the end of the first movie where he's holding the little twin, he goes, "I called him idiot," which is a callback to earlier in the movie when Rocket was complaining about what people were calling him. It's like, "She called me vermin." And it's like, and how much that hurts him. And it's like, oh gosh, Rocket is such a well-developed character throughout all these movies. And to see how much he grows and everything, it's like, it's like in Infinity War for him kind of sarcastically, going off with Thor and Groot. And it's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the captain. So as the captain, I'm making this decision to go do this." And then, but him actually stepping up and accepting responsibility when to have that really good heart to heart with Thor, which is like one of those. It's like, can we treat Thor as a serious character, please? That moment's awesome. Or he's like, "Well, what else do I have to lose?" And it's like and it's like, well, me, I could still lose a lot, says Rocket in reply. It's like, "You may not have anything to lose, but I could still lose a lot," and he does. It's like everyone he knows and loves gets snapped and dusted out of existence. And so to get them back, and it's like to have the family unit back and everything. I so want a movie that's set in those 5 years during the snap that focuses on Rocket and Nebula. It's like, because, oh gosh, Nebula's a really great character too. What's it about blue characters in Guardians movies that are really great characters? Because it's like, I know Rocket's a raccoon, he's not really technically blue skinned or whatever, but he wears a blue jumpsuit in the second movie, so I count it. And of course in the third one because it's the Guardians uniforms. But Nebula going from the first movie to be the big blue meanie, as Tony calls her in Endgame, to it's like when she hears Rocket's voice over the comm and realize he's okay, and she starts crying. That is the first time we've really seen any sort of like quote unquote soft emotion from Nebula throughout the entire MCU. It's mostly been yelling and stern talks. She's never really told a joke. The closest thing she gets to a joke is whenever she's walking away in Endgame from the landing pad after Scott Lang's been scared by the ship touching down. And she gets on her intercom and on her comlink, and she says, "Careful, Rhodey, there's an idiot in the landing zone." And it's like that's a joke for the audience, but she herself is not telling a joke. She's just being herself, really. So, but her mean spiritedness is just kind of amusing and it's humorous. So like that's really the kind of the closest that she's gotten to telling a joke, prior, prior to that moment. She's been a very serious character, and it's been like pain and sadness and anger from her up until like for even it was Endgame really past that. Guardians, it's the holiday special, the Guardians holiday special. It's like her showing concern for, it's like enough understanding of Rocket to I guess go back to Earth real quick and steal Bucky's arm. Hilarious. You got me Bucky's arm. It's like, oh, that's so good. It's like that's a relationship I want explored more between Nebula and Rocket. And not in a romantic sense or anything, because I feel like you say relationship and people immediately jump to shipping. But it's like, this bond, this understanding that these two characters have between one another. A partnership, a friendship, whatever. It's like I really want to see that explored more, because I almost said Gamora, for Nebula to start crying when she hears Rocket's voice and realizes he's okay. Oh my gosh, that almost made me cry in the theater. And it's like, oh wow, she really does care. It's like, again, what character growth? What character growth for her? And even because even in Volume 3, there's still a lot of her yelling, and because she had this terrible upbringing, and she's like, it's like it's gonna quote WandaVision, I guess. It's like she's kind of ship of Theseus, the person, because it's like, what part of her is still original? It's like even her face is different colors of blue. Was she blue to start? What is even her species? Is she a Kree? It's I don't know. So so it's like such great character work, very subtly done over several movies. It's like the opening to Endgame where she and Stark are in the Benatar and she wins that paper football game, and he goes, "Oh, you won fair and square, good job," and he holds up the hand, and she's like, that look on her face of, oh my gosh, wait, I actually just won this, and the realization kind of slowly sinking in. Karen Gillan is so underrated as an actress, and I feel like a lot of people don't know who the heck she is unless they've seen Doctor Who or the MCU. I know she's done like 2 of those new Jumanji movies, but those are kind of like, action comedies, and you don't really have to, give out your A material in terms of acting. I mean, there's still some serious acting to be done because they're playing people playing those characters or whatever, because it's a video game or whatever. So it's like, so there's some funkiness there in terms of playing, that you need to actually have some acting talent. But Karen Gillan is like really underrated as an actress. I think, and I think she needs to be cast in more quote unquote normal roles. And it's like, give her something like really meaty and dramatic, because she's done a lot of like action movies, comedies, like sci-fi, Doctor Who, of course. It's like, and she's very good at what she does, and I feel like she needs to, it's like really like it's like her name in big lights and stuff. And it's like more than just like it's like putting it's like I think she could definitely carry a movie all on her own and not just be in an ensemble. It's like from Amy Pond to Nebula. It's like let's see her do more. She's really really good. Um, I yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of those little character moments in this movie are just honestly really good. I guess I should talk about the High Evolutionary. He's fine. I wasn't blown away by him. I think it was some of the more. I wish he kind of been more cold and calculating throughout the entire thing, because I didn't really completely dig the total traditional mad scientist vibe from him, which I think is a little weird for me that I wasn't really completely sold on that. I think the moment that kind of undid the High Evolutionary for me was when he stumbled into the creature pen midway through the movie during one of the flashbacks, and he was obviously drunk, and he stumbled in, and and he requested Rocket's help to it's like to show him it's like, hey, your equation was right. It's that I feel like not undid the character, but I just didn't particularly like that direction. I don't know. There was just something about it to where he didn't click for me as a villain the way Ego did. He's certainly better than Ronan. I don't think Ronan's a terrible villain, but Ronan's kind of one note. He's fine. He's whatever. He's probably the biggest problem with Guardians 1, I don't think he's that big a huge problem. It's like he's kind of a boring villain, but whatever. It's like he's more of a plot device than a villain because he gets our heroes together, so that's fine. He serves his purpose and he does it well. And honestly, I just kind of wish that the Marvels wasn't taking place in the current timeline, and they went back to like the early 2000s, a couple years after Captain Marvel or whatever, and like have Carol Danvers face off against Ronan, and to kind of flesh him out a little bit more because he showed up in the first Captain Marvel. I was like, oh, this is cool. Maybe they could give him a little bit more backstory. They didn't really. They kind of hint that maybe they're going to eventually go that direction. I hope they do, because I think there's room for that character to be more impactful if you do a chronological series rewatch and you eventually get to Guardians and he's finally finished off. It's like, yay, that moron's done for. It's like, it's like eventually kind of Darth Maul him to where it's like he shows up and he doesn't really do much in his first appearance, but then over time, retroactively, you flesh out his backstory where it's like, oh wow, no, he's actually a really interesting, cool villain. So yeah, High Evolutionary. It was something specifically about that scene where he stumbles in drunk that I just kind of went, oh, okay, and I just didn't really care for him the rest of the time. I mean, it's not like, because I feel like a lot of his emotional outbursts were too childish for my liking. I would have preferred. I'm fine with him having outbursts, but I think I would have preferred more controlled, contained outbursts, which I know is completely antithetical to the term outburst. But it's like more of a quiet, seething anger. It's like I wanted to be scared of this guy. I was never everything he does and everything we know about this character and even his design. This is someone you should be scared of, and I wasn't really ever scared of him. If that makes sense. It's like when he blows up at some of his minions. I wish that it was more of a restrained, like just an evil side eye, and like that being enough, and that being enough of I just got chills from this guy. But I think he spends too much time screaming for my liking. And like I said, it's like he could. It's like the one time I think the way it would have worked better for me is if like he was pretty calm and collected, and like he had this very clear buried seething rage throughout it, buried beneath him the entire movie, and he never really let it loose until the very end when the Guardians are very clearly winning, and then he loses it on the control deck of his ship, and like he kills everyone there with his gravity powers or whatever, and then he finds Rocket and flings him up onto the ceiling. I think for me personally, that should have been the first time we really saw him finally lose his temper. because there was nothing, because this is the climax of the movie. It's ending. It's like this is the big villain showdown in the movie. And I feel like that would have made it feel more, it would have stood out more, I feel like, if this is when he finally loses his temper and he just goes completely nuts. And yeah, he throws Rocket around with his gravity powers. And it's like, and not because it takes away from the moment just a smidge, because the stuff with Rocket here is like where he uses the Deus Ex gravity boots, they're the Chekhov's gravity boots from earlier in the movie. And he uses that. It's like that, it's like that's a big clapping, cheer, whoop moment. But I think it would have been an even better one if throughout the entire movie, because I liked the part where Star-Lord and Groot are on the bridge or that office, whatever room that is, and they're looking over Counter Earth, and like they've got the quote unquote meeting with the High Evolutionary, and he's like still finishing something, so he's got his finger raised. It's like the power he held in just the finger raise, I think, is awesome. It's like, no, you're gonna wait. I am finishing something. Just hold on a moment. But it's the thing though. It's like that power he held in his finger being raised was just over his staff, and I really liked that. Where it's like that may work on some people, but on the Guardians, no, they're not buying it. They're not buying into what you're selling, dude. So that's when, so it's like they're all just standing there waiting for him to finish because they know what he's capable of. But at this point, even the Guardians know what he's capable of, but they're not particularly. Well, no, I guess I don't really completely know, because this is before they get the file. This is before this is. No. They do have Rocket's file at this point. They just don't have the access code. So yeah, they know what he's capable of because they've seen the tapes of Rocket being experimented on and everything. So yes, it's like they know what he's capable of, but they're still not really that intimidated. And so Peter has to, he does his Peter Quill thing where he. It's like he sees the one guy that they need. He's like, hey, I bet that access code. And then finally that's what's like, oh, you finally got time for us? It's like, and so I liked that, the calm, cool, I'm powerful demeanor was not working in that moment. And he does use his powers on them, but then he does the typical villain thing, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna let my henchman finish you off, and he starts to leave. But then Groot opens up his body, and it's just guns and guns and guns and guns and guns and guns and guns. And then it's like, all right, now kill them all. And oh, that was so cool. So I kind of wish that we had gotten more of that High Evolutionary throughout the entire movie, where he is just the more calm, menacing. And then it's not until the very, very end of the movie where he finally blows up at Rocket, because he just cannot fathom that this little rodent is smarter than he is. And it's like, you will never be better than me. I am better than you. You're nothing but the serial number. And then Rocket activates the boots, which, tethers him to the ground. And so the High Evolutionary's powers are useless against him now. And we get this amazing payoff, which we didn't even know we were building up to over the 9 years since the first movie came out, where you think it's just a throwaway joke every time it's referenced. Of I'm not a raccoon. I don't know what a raccoon is. Stop calling me a raccoon. Calling him weasel, calling him rabbit, all these different things. But Rocket finally has his acceptance of who he is, and he goes, the name's Rocket. Rocket Raccoon. And he shoots them right in the face. Amazing. So amazing. And then the other Guardians come in and they just go to town on him. Punch, kick, stab, shoulder check. It's like they just completely destroy this guy. And then Gamora with the final literal gut punch with the stab through the stomach just peels off his face, pulls an Optimus Prime from Transformers Revenge of the Fallen and goes, give me your face. And then you see the damage that Rocket did to him when he escaped, and you're like, oh, dang. It's like, that's a good reminder that raccoons are really dangerous, and they're not just cute little fluffy, like stuffed toys or pets. It's like they can really do some damage. And you see this mangled, it was almost, like fit like Face Off or something from the 90s. It's like I'm surprised James Gunn got away with that. So it's like, oh, what an amazing payoff, and then they escape the ship and they just leave him to die. And he's like, yeah, and he's done for. And it's like he's dead. He's gone. It's like he probably bled out and died before the ship even exploded, and then the ship exploded and really finished him off. There's a lot of actually gruesome stuff in this movie because there's the face peeling, and then then there's the one guy that they needed to get the access code from, and then they literally drop him out the window and let him fall to his death. That was actually like almost sadistic from Star-Lord and Groot because they let they let that momentum carry him all the way down, but then they slowed just enough to where, to where Peter and Groot would be fine. But then they used him as like this thing that stopped it and like the drag through the grass into the water, and then they rolled him over and like he's obviously dead because like he probably died on impact. And he just went down screaming the entire way. That was like, this guy aided in all these experiments, so he wasn't a good person at all. But it's like that was like cruel, and it's like the Guardians don't typically do cruel. They're not the. It's like we're going to do a bit of good, a bit of bad, maybe a bit of both. But they're not exactly they're not Batman either. It's like they don't have a no killing rule or whatever. So, but it's like that was maybe crossing a line almost. It's like that was dark when you really think about it. And it's like one of those you can only do this in super. That was almost James Gunn's The Suicide Squad poking through, as opposed to like pre-firing and rehiring Guardians 1 and 2 James Gunn. It's like there was a bit more cynicism and darkness in that particular death than anything else. Yeah. And so before I'm pretty much wrapped up on most of my thoughts. Just really quick before I get to the ending and probably end up crying in this review. I of course I got to talk about Rocket's buddies. His cage buddies, Lila and Teefs and Floor. Man, the movie starts and and you see them for the first time in the first flashback. You know what's gonna happen. I just read the synopsis and it's like, and I saw that the cast list of the like, oh, all these characters are dead. I knew that going in, but man, the gut punch when it still happens, and in the fact that even though they had very limited screen time, they still felt like fully developed, fleshed out characters. Just based on their just their mannerisms, their characteristics, and they're acted so well. And you can glean stuff through the story. Through this is that you can see like the evolution of the High Evolutionaries' experiments in each one of them, to where Floor was probably the first one because she's like the most rickety one or whatever. She's got kind of the bunny. She's the bunny. She's got the weird spider legs. And she's got a vocabulator instead of her mouth emitting the actual voice. So it's like she's got that thing over her mouth, almost like a muzzle, but then that's what her voice is coming out of. And she's clearly not that smart because she uses like caveman speak. It's like Rocket and Floor play. It's like it's very childlike, and then you get Teefs, who's definitely smarter than Floor, but not really by much. He's definitely still got some issues. And it's like, and it's like, maybe, I'm Teefs because, well, we all have them. Mine are obviously the most prominent. Oh. So he's still very simple and joyful. And so it's like, and then you get to Lila, and she's smart. She's got it together. She kind of understands what's going on more than anyone else. And you can kind of see that that's more what the High Evolutionary was working towards. And then he makes Rocket, and Rocket is like that's what he was kind of wanting from the start, but Rocket ends up surpassing even what he thought he was achieving, and that's where the cause of all these problems come from. And so I think just the base characteristics of these three other creatures like Rocket, his cellmates or whatever. I think that's just really really interesting because they could have all been like of equal intelligence and stuff, but they actually took the time to kind of decide how they're going to be acted, what their mannerisms would be, that you can kind of piece together. Because I was there, we were in like the third flashback, and I was kind of starting to piece it together. Like, okay, so Floor's probably like the first one, followed by Teefs and probably Lila, because it makes sense that the first experiment is like the least successful, and then after you learn more, then it gets better going on from there. So I thought that was interesting, and yeah, when they died, that's a gosh, that's a gut punch. And now that comment from Guardians 1, where he kind of again, he's still being a little jerk, but he goes, "Oh, boo hoo, my wife and child are dead," and Groot go, "Oh," and it's like, "Oh, whatever, I don't care if it's mean, we've all got dead people, doesn't mean he can make the rest of us dead along with him." It's like that, we've all got dead people. It's like, yeah, I mean, he really does. These are his his original family, for lack of a better term, really. And it's like, they died in front of him. It's like, and he's so young at that point, that it's like, to process that, but still also be this hyper intelligent being, and being able to steal a spaceship to escape. And it's like he's killed 3 people and mauled a third person, to the point where he needs a flesh mask over his face to hide the injuries. And then that's that. I mean, that's like I said, this movie's a little darker, but it's not dark for darkness sake. Like the darkness has a point to it, because then we get to the ending, and oh my gosh, this is probably one of the best endings to a Marvel movie ever, where the Guardians decide to go their separate ways. Peter decides, to go back to Earth and actually reconnect with his grandfather, who the last time he saw him was 30 years earlier when his mom died. And so, like, this entire time, his grandpa's probably been like, what happened to him? Was he abducted? Did he run away? He's probably had all these questions, and then suddenly he just shows back up. 30 years later, he's grown, but I love the fact that he just knew. He just knew. He didn't. There wasn't. It's like, hey, how are you? Who are you? My name's Jason Quill. It's like, well, my name's Peter. It's like there was no introduction. He just knew. Is mm. And then, of course, the spin around shot, which usually I would say is cheesy, but oh my gosh, did it work? It's like it worked so well for that scene, as they embrace and they hug, interspliced with all the cuts back to nowhere, and this just pure euphoria, we're all alive dance party, victory celebration. Oh, like, like I said, it's a really, really good ending. And then this conclusion of all these different character arcs that started 9 years ago, mm, and being on this long journey with them, through their own movies, through crossover movies. This is the heart and the soul of the MCU. This is why I'm still going to be engaged, despite at the top of this review talking about, it's like, yeah, no, I haven't really enjoyed it completely, and they've done some character things I haven't necessarily liked and stuff. They've done some things I'd call missteps, but it's this long form storytelling that's usually only reserved for television, that they're doing in cinema and on TV. This long form, we can tell these massive stories, and if we do it right, these long, emotional, you get really invested stories with these characters. And it's like when they first show up, you don't care about them at all. You don't know who this is. It's like, you've never heard of Iron Man before. Who the heck is Iron Man? He's like a C-list superhero. He's not Spider-Man. No one cares. No one cares about Iron Man. But by the time he saves the entire universe, you're weeping at his funeral, because you spent 10 years with this guy. And then now with the Guardians of the Galaxy, it's like Nebula. Who's Nebula? She's just some punk sidekick bad guy. It's like she has like 5 lines in the entire movie. You got that one girl from Doctor Who to shave her head and play her. It's like, who cares about Nebula? But then over time you realize, oh wait, this is actually a really nuanced, well-developed character. And everyone's kind of dancing, and she's kind of resistant at first, but then she opens up and she's dancing along with the kids and stuff and having fun. And then again, kind of like the whole Rocket Raccoon thing, where it's like you don't realize that's a payoff that they've been building towards this entire time. Same thing with Drax, because it's a throwaway gag at the end of the first movie that was a follow up gag from a deleted scene where Drax doesn't like dancing for whatever reason, and he turns around and he spots Groot dancing, and baby Groot in his pot dancing, and he freezes, and then he turns away, and then Groot starts dancing, and this whole idea that Drax doesn't like dancing, they carry that over a little bit into the other movies. It's just kind of this funny ha ha thing. And then, they mention it again at the beginning of this one. It's like, no, dancing is for stupid people. But then finally, after all this time, even Drax, mm, even Drax finally opens up, and it's like you don't know what you're seeing at first. It's just Drax shot from behind. And you see his head start to bob a little bit, and you're like, wait a second, what? His head bobs a little bit more to the music. And then he just totally loses himself in the music, and he's dancing with all the kids. Oh, man. Whew. And then like they're all cheering and dancing, and then Cosmo. Oh, I haven't even talked about Cosmo and Kraglin hardly at all. It's like I really wish they had been in the movie more. My only complaint with them is that they weren't in it that much. I really would have liked to have seen them be more involved. And then Cosmo howls, and then everyone else just yells and screams in jubilation. And then and then in celebration, and then the movie ends on Rocket doing the same, and then we cut to black, and then the credits start to roll, and just what an awesome ending. Wow. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is the best trilogy that Marvel has put out. The Captain America trilogy is really good. Don't get me wrong, because it has a pretty strong start with First Avenger. I like First Avenger a lot. Then Winter Soldier ups the ante a whole lot and introduces kind of the world to the Russo brothers and what they can do in terms of action directors. And then, of course, Civil War really, brought home Captain America's story for, in kind of for the time, at the time. And, it's like, this is really him, standing up for what he believes, and everything is like, and, and it, even if it divides the Avengers, and it's just brilliant storytelling all the way around. It's a really strong trilogy. But Thor, I mean, he doesn't even have a trilogy anymore. He's got 4 movies, and even it's like the people think some way about the first 2. Most people kind of generally agree that the third one's pretty fun, and then the 4th movie at this point, a lot of people just hate. It's like I don't hate it, but I don't like it either. Then the Incredible Hulk only has 1 movie. There's 4 Avengers movies, and there's going to be 2 more, so we can't really call that a trilogy. The Iron Man trilogy, the first one's really good, the second one's okay, and then the third one is either good to okay to bad, depending on who you talk to. I like Iron Man 3, but it's nowhere near as good as Iron Man 1. I think it's better than 2, but in terms of consistency and just the raw emotion poured into these characters, Guardians of the Galaxy, from 1 to Volume 2 to Volume 3 now, and of course, interspliced with Infinity War and Endgame. And I guess we'll go ahead and count Love and Thunder, and of course we'll count the holiday special. Guardians of the Galaxy is just so good. All 3 movies are so good. It's like, yeah, I've got my complaints. It's like, what the heck was up with Adam Warlock? Why was he here? But it's like that. It's like that doesn't really hardly even matter in terms of it's a legitimate complaint, but it's like it pales into comparison how like the whole thing finally comes together, and actually having lasting consequences, where because the whole thing I was complaining about Thor is that they kind of don't know what they've been doing with his character. They've done things with Thor, and then they've just immediately reversed them, because it's like, okay, he's finally accepted the mantle as king, which is kind of where his trilogy was leading him, and then now we're just going to immediately undo that. And even the symbol of his kinghood, it's like mirroring his father with the missing eye. We're going to undo that too, and we're and, and we're going to give him a prosthetic eye that Rocket it's had stuffed in an unmentionable place. And so we're going to use that as a joke and turn Thor into a total joke, and just totally undo whatever probably good storytelling we had done with him. And then, kind of almost doing the same thing with the Guardians, where you kill Gamora, but then you bring back her 2014 self. And, I mean, if the Russos had been in charge, or it's like, not to dismiss the Russos, I think they're good filmmakers, and the two Avengers movies and the two Cap movies that they did are really good. But, it's like with, that kind of direction, with that kind of writing team, I feel like, based on what they do, because there's precedence based on what they did with Cap and Peggy that a lot of people disagree with. And it kind of, a lot of people see as antithetical to Cap's character arc, which I kind of agree with. It's like, no, he's accepted his position. He's not going to go back in time to live with Peggy and create a branching timeline. It's like, I think if, they had been in charge of these characters, Peter and Gamora would have ended up back together again. Even though this is a different version of Gamora, she's technically a different person. It'd be one of those things where we'd look and go, isn't this a little weird? But James Gunn keeping them broken up because Gamora's a different person now, and kind of undoing the undoing of the consequences in a way, I think was just such a smart move. And it's like, and because Gamora's a good, I really like Gamora. She's a really interesting character. Both versions of her we have now, so it's like I wouldn't mind seeing more of her. But it's like, just the way James Gunn weaves this entire narrative through the trilogy, and then with the stuff that he helped with in terms of the Guardians for Infinity War and Endgame. It's just really, there's really awesome characters, and I love these movies so much. They are my favorite parts of the Marvel universe. Forget the Avengers. I love the Guardians of the Galaxy. So, yeah, that is, so I would recommend it. It's easy answer. I would recommend it. So yeah, that is my review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Hopefully this is going to be the only time I end up kind of almost losing it and breaking down in the middle of a movie review this summer. I'll definitely talk about Spider-Verse. I'll definitely talk about Transformers. The others might be by a case basis. We'll find out just what I'm in the mood for, and what I like and what I feel like I had to talk to. I wasn't even really planning on doing any more movie reviews other than Transformers. Because I reviewed The Last Night in Bumblebee, so it's like it just kind of makes sense to continue on with Rise of the Beast. But I got out of Guardians, and I was just like, I have to talk about this movie, and I just have to gush about it. It's like, and yeah, bring up the issues, but it's like, man, it's just, what a movie, just, So, this, you know what? I'm probably gonna buy it on Blu-ray. And I don't really buy too many movies physically, because at this point we have all the streaming services, so it's like it'll end up somewhere. So it's like, if I like a movie, it's going to end up somewhere that I'll just be able to watch with the streaming service. So it's like, why even bother buying a Blu-ray at this point? But no, this is one I'm definitely going to buy the Blu-ray for, to put it with Guardians 1 and 2. This is a trilogy that demands to be completed. So, yeah. So yeah, that is my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I hope you all have enjoyed watching. If you even watched this long, I know it's like an hour and 20 minutes at this point. So thank you for watching this whole thing. If you have, or listening rather, I know it's not exactly interesting to watch because it's just the one static image of the poster or whatever. But thank you for tuning in and listening. If you have listened this long, and I guess I'll see you guys whenever the next movie comes out, which, at this rate, it's probably going to be Transformers. I would have to check the schedule again. There might be another movie that comes out before then I'll want to talk about, because it's going to be a busy summer. But yeah, so anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time. So goodbye.